years in the making. It's difficult to measure, product success over a period of years. It's much easier to say, I want to get it done. Can we get it done by next year? And it's hard because, if there was some magic wand to be able to accelerate project schedules, we would have invented it already. Really, portfolio management isn't all about just accelerating schedules. There's so much more to it. But Andreas, I'm sure you have thoughts as well.
Well, I couldn't say it better myself. I think that is the most annoying question you can get. How do we do this faster? And why can we not do it faster? And I think you hit the head of the nail there. And that it's easier to measure time. And the second easiest is expenses. So you can also get questioned about, can we make it cheaper? But
it's always the money.
Yeah, it's money or time, and of course they are important. But it's amazing how often it seems as if many people forget about the scope and the quality. I mean, that is actually the most important. If you have to rank these, I mean, you still have to make something that is meaningful and that can give in the benefit for patients at some point in time. Then it really doesn't matter if it comes a year later or not. I mean, if you're delivering garbage, it doesn't help anyone, even if it's quick. I do believe that people understand this, but in the heat of the moment, you tend to turn to the time questions. How quick can we do this?
I'm sure everyone can relate to exactly what you're saying, because Mark said something, and I can actually see some of the people who's got camera on. They've nodded, so I can. It's a really thing. I've got last question, a warm up. Please tell me what you had for breakfast, and I'm gonna leave it up to you, and you can tell me. Or tell us, all of us, the audience as well, about the panel discussion, because everyone is really looking forward to it. So that's my last question, and I'm going to leave it up to you.
I haven't gotten to breakfast yet, just working on my tea so far, but maybe later this morning. We'll see how it goes.
Perfect. And Andreas, maybe he had a porridge or maybe fika or...
Well, I'm actually close to dinner. I have had my lunch and breakfast and everything, so I'm all good. But I'm impressed by your Swedish, the word fika.
I try to impress everyone. But yeah, thank you so much. And now I'm gonna leave it up to you. And it's everyone is ready, so I'm sure you can start with your panel discussion. So thank you so much, and enjoy, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So Andreas, I hope you don't mind, I'll just tee it up real quickly that our topic is, you and I have chatted a bit leading up to this, and we both think that this is a really relevant topic around getting executives aware or on board with the idea of portfolio management. Thought it was a relevant topic as to how do you get your executive team bought into the discipline and the rigor that portfolio management brings. And the byline being the hint, you don't lead off by saying you're going to be implementing a big complex strategy, a big complex process. That's what turns everybody off, right? So with that, let me, if you're okay, Andreas, maybe I'll just tee it off and ask you a question, and we can go from there.
Please go ahead.
So from your experience in, given that we're giving away the punchline is leading off with process may be risky, or if you're trying to get executive buy-in. Can you kind of share with us your thoughts as to what it is that, how do you get executive buy-in, and what is it about process that's a big turnoff for decision makers?
Yeah, well, I think that, as you said, it's an extremely relevant and important question. And I have some recent experience where we have had an agreement in the executive team that we need to have this process around decision making in general. But of course, that entails most of it would be about the portfolio and how we prioritize between projects or other investments and so on. The interesting thing is that, and I could experience that in myself as well, that once we started to discuss what kind of process is it that we need, it turns off everyone, even though that we have an agreement that it is important that we get on top of this and really do this. So I think, yeah, my interpretation of this, or one way of looking at this, or one component of this turning off, I think, is that once you get to discuss these things, you realize how complex things actually are. And that is kind of scary. So I don't think it's the process in itself, but it's just highlights how many different factors you need to weigh in to make these good portfolio decisions. And then you can react in that in two ways. You can either embrace it and say, yes, we need to continue and we need to figure out what are the most important parts of the decision, or decisions, when do we, and how do we decide that? Or you can say, yeah, well, we can leave that. We can just go ahead and make decisions the way we always have done. So I think it has to do with the complexity. It's not a good argument for not having good processes, but I think that's the reality. And it is overwhelming when you look at it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that's spot on. Yeah, the complexity that's involved with decision making. If you're selecting what the next product that you want to invest in, or what upgrades you want to apply, if you want what target you want to go after in a pharma setting, there's so many different dimensions that go into it in terms of what's the patient population, what's the ability to pay, what's the level of acceptance for the payers that are in your particular market that you're targeting.
Exactly.
What's the level of risk? What's the technical outcome? Have you done something like this before? How long does it take to get to commercialization? All those, I just rattle off ones at the top of my head, and Andreas, I'm sure you've got others as well. You might easily get up to a dozen different criteria, and how do you measure those? And I agree with you. I think it's easy for all of us. It's human nature when faced with a very complex decision. The human mind tries to simplify it quickly and break it down to, gosh, what are the top 3 criteria I need to worry about? I can't hold a dozen different criteria in my head. So therefore it's too complex. We only need to pay attention to the top 3, and therefore we don't need any kind of data repository. We don't need any complex charts. We can just run with what we've got.
Yeah.
Completely agree. One interesting tangent that you and I had chatted about before was on a big company versus small company. I think you and I both have examples. Maybe you could share a little bit about that in terms of what have you noticed, particularly in small companies, with this desire, this zeal to be agile, or to try to make decisions quickly and without any really process or rigor.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and again that goes back to human nature, I guess, and in many cases also about prior experience from the people in these different organizations. So yes, for the audience, right now I'm in this company, Ascelia Pharma in Sweden. We are around 20 people. We are quite experienced, all of us. So we have I would say that all employees more or less have experience from big pharma. So I also have a big pharma background. And what is interesting here is as you mentioned that we have chatted about, is that in the small organization, in Ascelia Pharma to some extent, even though we have the experience that should counteract it, but also from other experiences I have from before, you have this notion that small organizations should be able to make quick decisions and really adapt to new realities in a split second. I guess it's true in a way, because you can always gather all the decision makers by the coffee machine in 2 seconds, and then we can make the decision. You have the people that have the mandate to make the decision, and very accessible. But I think that is a misunderstanding, or only part of it, because when you start to scratch the surface and ask these people, well, are you really ready to make the decision? Most people would soon realize that, well, yeah, we may need some information as well before we make the decision. So I think there's a consensus or a broad understanding that decisions are made on the information you have at hand. And that's why in my experience, you have most of the challenges, or maybe different views on how much information you need. And that is where I mean, it's also based on experience. If you don't have the experience, if you don't have all the competences in the organization that you need for driving a drug development project, then of course you will miss a lot of information, or you will lack information, and then you may also make quicker decisions because you think you have the full set of important information available. So that is, maybe now I'm skipping ahead a little bit, so I will take a step back. So what I try to say here is that also in the small organization, you need to be thorough in the way you collect information, and agree upfront on which information is needed to make a certain decision. And in the best of all worlds, you will be able to say, we know that we have this much of information that is needed to make the information, but we can only access this amount. And that's fine, because then you at least know what you're also missing. And then you can take a decision, not quicker necessarily, but you will have in a smaller organization, you are forced to work with higher risk because you don't have the information. In the large organization, you can afford to do an extra clinical trial to address a specific issue or something else that in order to mitigate or reduce the risk. You cannot do that in small organizations. So I think that is the difference. It should not be that you are quicker to make decisions. You still have to have the same process. You have to have the same being meticulous about things, but then also accept that you cannot do everything when you are in a small organization. So that's, I think, my main point here.
Yeah, I love that, and I agree. I think that the one big takeaway that I noted in your comment there was that it's important to talk about what information contributes to the decision, and of that, of those pieces of information that you really need, which are the ones can you actually obtain in the period of time that it takes to make this decision. Most decisions, you don't have the luxury of years to be able to make the decision. You need to make it in a period of possibly even days or weeks. And so it's important to be able to step back and say, here's the criteria here's the information we need to be able to make this decision. And here's the 80% level that we think we can achieve in terms of the numbers or inputs of where we can be within the time frame. And just like you said, I think to unemotionally step back and say, okay, here's the decision we want to make. Here's the criteria it's going to be involved. Here's the information we need. That's kind of a more dispassionate, more of a scientific look at how do we make the decision. I have found for some of the decision makers, it's difficult for them to step back unemotionally and look at themselves and look at the framework as to how they want to make the decision. I think the cultures of a few of the companies, the current company I'm in, it's much better. Past companies I've been in, the culture is so driven towards action and action bias. It's difficult. I found myself being looked at as a bureaucrat just by suggesting, help me understand what are the criteria you want to factor in this decision. In some cases, I've had senior executives kind of wave me away and say, we don't need to get into that. This is obviously the decision we want to make. This is the direction we're going to go. And I think perhaps we as a practice, in some cases, we've done a disservice. I think in some cases, the PMOs at some big companies have become too academic. They've become kind of these ivory towers of data, just churning out to the infinite decimal point, trying to get NPV down to exact numbers, rather than, again, shooting for that 80% level, getting to what's useful and then moving quickly. So I love what you called out. I think we as practitioners in today's economy, it's up to us to not necessarily get those swim lanes perfect and get those NPV templates perfect, but rather to kind of be conductors to try to just figure out, okay, for this decision, what are the criteria that are absolutely critical, and how do we get to the 80% information level for those criteria so that we can make this decision by Friday, for example.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I like to, I can notice that I'm shifting my view on how I manage projects, coming from the big pharma and where you have quite useful and helpful, effective processes to do all these things. I'm now in the smaller organization starting to think more about the decisions. When are we going to make decisions? And that is the actual project plan. So it's not so much about the swim lanes and as you said, but when do we and the decisions where there are multiple contributors, especially, or where there are dependencies, are of course the most important. So when I need some regulatory and CMC, bring them together. When does that happen, and what kind of decision is that? I think that is the way of thinking that helps me right now to better understand what we are trying to achieve here. You said something else there before. Yeah, and coming back to the smaller organization, I also have some late experience from startups, spin-outs from the universities, and they are, I love them because they are so passionate and they really are there for the right reasons, these peoples. But one challenge that they have, coming back to the decision making here and not seeking for information and making an objectively based decision, is that they are so passionate, and it is really their babies that we're talking about, and that makes this very much more difficult. They tend to take it as a personal offense if you try to propose something different. That is, well, let's have take a step back and have a look at this and see what makes most sense to do. And I think that is that's a big challenge. And I think you can also find that also in bigger organizations, but bigger organizations have other issues maybe, but not so much of that kind of challenge.
Yes, I think this is my baby syndrome, where the person becomes enamored. So one of the biggest dangers around projects is when a sponsor becomes completely enamored and in love with the particular scope of the project. Yeah. That can be particularly challenging, and especially in a small company. To me, that's one advantage in larger companies, is where you can bring other decision makers to the discussion to hopefully bring some reality to the conversation. But to your point, that's kind of the advantage, but also the curse of a small company, is that it can move very quickly. It can be incredibly focused, but it also opens itself up to, the one sponsor could be the head of the company. And so it's very difficult to try to have a conversation. Yeah. What problem are we trying to solve with this project? What is the intended market? How big is that market? What do we expect the benefits to be? Yeah, I've run into that many times.
Yeah. Yeah, well, then of course there's also the financial aspect in the small company. You can only afford one project, that's another perspective on this challenge. But it's still you need to try to make the decisions as objective as possible. But of course there are some limitations you have to adhere to.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me kind of rephrase a little bit. So I think this has been a really great discussion of all the challenges. I think we've done a good job of identifying the problem.
Yeah.
That the animals that we deal with are biased, they are emotional, they are engaged, they are headstrong, as they should be. That's how they've gotten to the successful positions where they're at. So maybe we can just spend a couple minutes talking about solutions. We talked a little bit about over the last couple comments in terms of what's worked. I'll offer maybe an idea, and maybe you can counter that.
Yeah.
So to your point, I have found great success in, rather than leading with a solution, is trying to work with key executives to try to identify the problem in the decision making. So I think you raised a great question that I've used many times myself, is I try to find an executive or a couple executives that are deep involved. They're at the heart of the decision getting made. I ask them, I say, so when is this decision going to get made, and who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in that?
Mm.
And many times the person just looks at me and scoffs and says, well, I'm going to do it myself, and that's good to go. And then I'll sometimes ask that same question to other stakeholders that are involved in the same decision. I'll get different answers. And just by comparing the answers, I can sometimes see where the decision may be fraught with risk, because one or two people think they're the ones making the decision, and two or three other people think that it's going to be a group decision. And so just by kind of raising that disagreement up is enough to start discussion. And so finally, I've gotten some success in being able to say, well, this person thinks that it's their decision, but these people think that they need to be involved. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of raise up that disagreement, and they say, great, we'll talk about it at staff meeting on Wednesday. Boom, I now have my lever to be able to at least bring in just a tiny bit of structure and say, okay, so we're going to make the decision as a group. What do you guys want to look at? What are the key, the top 3 criteria you want to look at for making this decision? And suddenly, before we know it, I'm getting them thinking about the decision-making process, if you will, or the decision progression. Yeah. But you tell me, what has worked for you?
I think that is an excellent way of doing it. I think I'm a believer in that just raising these questions and creating clarity around the decisions. I think that is the key. And as you said, I have many times experienced that, well, different scenarios maybe, but sometimes when I believe that we have made a decision, it turns out that no one else thought that. Then I realize I made a very poor preparation for that decision. So you really need to go out and talk to the people and say, hey, this is coming up. We need to have a decision. We need which way to go or whatever it is. And as you said, talk to different stakeholders that you identify. And in that process, you have to clarify who is actually making the decision. As you said, it could be a person or an individual or a head function or whatever, or it could be a group decision. But even when you have the group decision, I'd like to have at least in the back of my head that if we cannot really agree, if there are different opinions, there still has to be one person that make the final call if we are forced to it. So trying to create that clarity. Then I also, as a Swede, I'm all for consensus decisions. So the group should be chipping in and all should agree to what we are going to do. That's the best scenario, because then it's much easier also when you implement the decision. Of course, there will be many cases where you have different opinions, and in a good, healthy organization, you will accept that and you will execute, even if you didn't really accepted the decision from the beginning. But all these things are super important, I think, and I think that the method that you propose is very simple, but I think it works. And that is about talking to people. As a project manager or a portfolio manager, your job is, of course, to identify the important decisions, and then you can work from that.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yeah, that's really what I've noticed over the last several years, a real evolution to being kind of the detective, trying to identify what are the important decisions that need to get made and bringing very light but important structure to those decisions. Yeah. I like that a lot. So maybe we can get into a little bit in order to get there, to be able to have that ability. I think it takes a certain amount of soft skill on our part as practitioners. It takes a certain level of trust that we have to carry through organization to be able to have that up close and personal conversation with the executives to say, because they're kind of getting vulnerable. They're kind of saying, yeah, this is what it takes to make the decision. Maybe I don't own the entire decision. They have to trust you a little bit. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that in terms of what kind of, it's no longer, it used to be that our practice was really all about the numbers. You just had to be really good about making sure that the Gantt charts were all perfect. Yeah. They had to roll up. You just had to make sure the spreadsheets were all good. Churn out your charts, churn out your ball graphs, and you could drive this and get your stack of your prioritizations, get your slides all together, and you're good to go. But now I'm finding for all the reasons we just discussed, there's so many more soft skills involved. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will try to speak to that. Now, as I said, currently I'm in a company with around 20 employees, and we are growing. So that's an added challenge, and we are. The good thing is that we all understand that when we are growing as a company, and we in a year's time will be 40 people employed. We really need to be open, and here I think we need to be agile and quick-footed, if you can say so, to adapt and find ways to communicate across the company and different functions in the company. Because what I think is our biggest fear is that we will start to create this silo mentality. We can already notice it, even if we're only 20 people right now. So yeah, what kind of soft skills can I use here? I think it is more, it is really to be prepared. I think that's where I start. I need to understand what we need to achieve and what to do. So that's actually more kind of a list of the important decisions or key deliverables, maybe, if you like. And then I have to work. I try to reach out to all my stakeholders internally and externally quite regularly. I think it's just keeping the dialogue open and ongoing. I think that is the best way of doing it. Of course, it takes a lot of time, and when we grow, it will be more and more difficult to do it. But I think, and then also get to learn the executives, the personalities of them. I mean, it's always easy to communicate with someone that you know to some level, what makes that person go and ticking, and what should you not say and do, and so on. So I think it is really about the soft skills that you mentioned. I don't have any specific trick or tips here, but it's more than that. You have to be patient, I guess, as well. And it takes time to build these relationships, and you have to just accept that.
No, I think that's spot on. I think the patient takes the patience and being able to build the relationships is what's key in our practice to be able to add value.
Yeah.
I have found many ways that my consulting background, having that service mentality, many times I've viewed myself as an internal consultant, and many times as a consultant, you don't lead with the solution. Just like you said, you need to get to know the person and understand. You got to kind of walk in their shoes a little bit before you can help them. Many times I've seen especially in big companies, people walk in and say, "I'm here to help," and people react to that negatively, because that's saying you're here to help means that you're basically here to give them a bunch of work.
Yeah.
And I think in our practice, I think we've gotten kind of mislabeled with that thinking, is that, oh, here come the portfolio, or here come the project people, and we're armed with all of our templates and all of our charts, and we just lay them down on the poor unsuspecting decision making. Next thing you know, they're completely overwhelmed and drowning in additional work. They're not even working on the actual project anymore. They're filling out all kinds of templates, and for them, it's just a big bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think you have to start out small and demonstrate from a service mentality, small ways, how you're able to help. Heck, I have found just by offering to be the note taker in decision-making meetings gets me an invite. If you know, I'm not going to be there, I can't contribute to you know, the scope of the project in any way. I can't contribute to really being able to bring in the industry perspective or even detailed clinical data. So they've got all those people already invited to meetings. So the only way I can get invited to the meeting is say, hey, I'll take the notes, I'll publish the minutes, and I'll capture it and incorporate that with the overall portfolio. And they say, sure, sounds great. Because you know what I found out? Nobody likes taking notes. Nobody likes capturing the minutes. But that way, I actually am able to form kind of what are the key open questions, what are the next steps, what are the action items, and suddenly people appreciate that value, and it gets me into the conversation. So I found, you know, that service mentality, just finding small ways to be able to support and help the process along, I mean, helps a lot in many ways. And it's just, in my mind, it's just going to what you said. You got to be patient, you got to get close and help them in any way you can.
Yeah, actually, a small reflection on that. I think it was quite interesting. I have always had the mindset or the idea that asking people for what I can do for them, that is a good way of getting an answer to it. The problem is that when you ask that question, many people cannot answer because they haven't thought about it.
Right.
And it becomes kind of ridiculous if you prepare and say, send an email 2 weeks in advance that I would like to have this conversation about this and that, because really doesn't fly either. So I think you are also here saying something very important, that maybe you should just do something. In your case, offering to take the notes and show what you can do. Yeah. And then you have to be very much aware of how people react to that. Of course, you can also step on someone's toes if you're in the worst case. But I think it's sometimes actually better to just try things, see if it works, try something else if it doesn't work, but always with a mindset that you want to help these people, the executives or the project team or whoever, in actually deliver high quality results at the end of the day. I think you have to leave your ego behind and being this service person. I think that's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's spot on. Hey, Katie, I know there's a number of questions people have been asking.
Yeah, that's true. But I was so into your conversation that I really didn't want to split anything up. And right now I feel like I'm gonna join PPM industry and
Come on in. It's great. We love good people.
Maybe this makes me part of it already. But yeah, as you said, this was really insightful and really fruitful. I can see some questions popping up. So I'm gonna quickly ask. So we've got Joe Stoller. We've got, what are the key metrics you use to inform an investment decision besides NPV, ROI, RRR, IRR? So that's from Joe. So who would like to answer?
I can say something. Right now, again, I'm in a small company. Of course, we need to do this as the best we can, but we are also, as I also mentioned earlier, we are also limited by that we have a small portfolio. We cannot really expand or decide very much about it, and we have the resources we have, and we depend on that we can raise more money to if we want to expand project portfolio. Mm-hmm. So that said, we do of course look at, I would say, more on the business opportunity. We have to see that there is a potential market. We need to confirm that that there is some evidence for that payers are willing to pay for the product. But we do not work with NPVs or something like that for the moment. I think that is something that we will implement when our portfolio grows, hopefully. Mm-hmm. So we are having some sort of subjective, objective approach to this, a little bit softer than NPV calculations, even though we have done that as well. But you all know that they can be tweaked in many different ways to the way you want them to be anyway. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm not sure if Mark would like to add anything to that. Feel free.
Andreas, I would love some time for us to get together over beers and just talk about NPV. Would love to do that. For all the points that you just raised. I have found over the last, it's been about the last 5 years, I've been on a personal tirade trying to kind of poke a hole in NPV for the reasons that you just raised up. I can't tell you how many times I've implemented an NPV process only to have it overturned by game playing, people figuring out a way to manipulate the numbers, manipulate the risk-adjusted discount rate or the revenues, and even if I get it close to where it hasn't been gamed or manipulated, once I put it up there, decision makers, the first question they have is, well, what's underneath there? What are the real revenues? What are the costs? Yeah. And so immediately I found that NPV becomes an abstraction, and it becomes, and it's very seductive because it takes so many different pieces of data and puts it in one number. It's seductively attractive to make us think that it can make the decision for you. And I found decision makers, once you've gone through all that work, they immediately want to start tearing it up anyway, because they want to know, show me the 10-year revenue outlook, show me the 10-year cost outlook, show me all the risks. They want to get into the details anyway. So NPV in some ways is defeating. I found what's more useful, and I'll say the same thing with IRR or other ways of trying to condense the overall ROI equation. I found it more useful, rather than trying to come up with complex equations and putting it down into very compact numbers, to actually kind of spread it out and try to find charts that reflect those trade-offs. So simple cost versus revenue, plotting out what's the total cost versus the total revenue, trying to plot out risk, trying to get some sort of assessment of risk and plotting that against revenue or benefit. Sometimes there's other benefits besides strict revenue. Sometimes just target market, your overall patient population or value to the patients is a useful conversation. So again, the data is never going to be perfect, but at least trying to spread it out visually so you can have a visual comparison, and sometimes multiple dimensions. That's why I say once you get to that decision, if you can get people to buy in and say, okay, I care about target patient population, I care about total cost, I care about time to market. If to our earlier conversation, Andreas, if you can get them to spell out those top 3 to 5 criteria, you're well on your way.
Yeah.
And then just create some charts. You can create ball charts where you've got like 3 or 4 different dimensions.
Yeah.
You've got time, and that in itself will drive good conversation, because really all you're trying to do is get people to talk. You're trying to get them to ask questions of each other, and rather than to have the conversation openly, rather than just do it in their head and put it in an email.
Yeah, that's why we've got the Q&A.
That's a great question, Joe. I appreciate you teeing that up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Hopefully that was sufficient. We've got a rather comment from Marcus. He says he appreciates the 80-in approach. In my observation, business figures I only like a gate, but not the key decision-making aspects. I'm not sure if you'd like to, or who would like to comment on that. If you agree, if you got anything to say.
So I agree with that. I found that executives like gates because it puts some structure and it puts some format in there. But yeah, I've met with resistance to say, if you say this decision gate, this decision point, this DP3, whatever have you, once you start putting some requirements in there, I found you'll get resistance. But I have found it still drives better conversation. Once you say, okay, this decision point, here's the criteria, it's never going to be perfect. You just have to have a thick skin and talk amongst your, there's always going to be executives that are responsible for kind of the stage gate process and want to make sure that it makes sense. You just have those conversations with them one-on-one to make sure that it is relevant. And then you go in with a thick skin. People love to complain about the process, love to complain about the criteria, but I have found it forces people to talk. And even if they're complaining about the criteria, that tells you something that's going to help the process. But Andreas, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much agree to what you say, and I think I had something on my mind, but it disappeared. So I think the important thing is it may not be so much the actual figures, and you said that 80% of the information needed. I think that is a good way of thinking. But as you also said, it's just more like a guidance, an idea about, or to help you remember that you actually need to figure something out before you make a decision, and having that conversation early on. To agree that you need to know something about, well, let's say cost and time and for whatever it is. Of course, you cannot decide to do something before you have seen the proposal. And that comes quite naturally when you go out and source services from a CRO, for example. Then you have a very meticulous process where you measure many different things before you make the decision that this is a CRO that we want to work with. And I think you can apply some of that, not everything because it's very cumbersome, but some of that also in other internal processes. So it's more about creating the clarity of what kind of information is important for the decision.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, both. It's wonderful to hear, really. We've got a few more questions. Mithun had to go to another meeting, but he left us a comment. He says, excellent conversation. Good to see you again, Mark and Andreas. How do you go about finding consensus around a decision, especially in a virtual workspace/team? So we will have a recording afterwards, so he'll be able to have an answer for his question. So if you'd like to answer that one briefly.
I have to read it.
How do you go about finding consensus around a decision, especially in a virtual workspace/team?
So consensus is a tough one, and it gets back a little bit to the comments that Andreas and I were making around who makes the decision. Mm-hmm. I found if you do this wrongly, you end up having everybody is involved with the decision, and And I think the worst decisions are driving towards 100% consensus amongst everyone. You end up getting some of your worst decisions that way. I think, to Andreas, you raised up an earlier example, is that typically with a decision, there's usually one person that needs to own it, one or two people that really own it. And then a variety of different stakeholders need to either poke holes in it or raise up risks or concerns. And so if you kind of set up that light adversarial relationship with the person that owns the decision and the people that have the, I guess, veto power or ability to kind of, for example, tech ops or supply chain, many times they're hugely impacted by decisions that the research team or the clinical team is making. And so they need to be able to weigh in and say, hey, if you go with option A, you're going to make our lives horrible. And oh, by the way, we're going to have to get another 10 FTEs to support that. By factoring those in, that you can help make sure to come up with the optimal decision, but they don't necessarily get to make the decision. They're just shaping it. So that aspect, in the virtual environment, it's obviously much easier if you can have people facing each other. But you know what? I'm sure we as practitioners, we've been dealing with people in other geographies, other time zones for quite some time. So to me, this Zoom virtual environment just maximizes our skill set in making sure that people are involved and finding ways to bring them in. Andreas, what do you think?
No, I agree. And maybe I know I mentioned consensus myself, and maybe that is the wrong term here. I think it's more important to make sure that everyone at the table understand the decision. Because as you mentioned here, it may be that someone are really hit hard by the decision, that they need to work the heck out of them and in order to deliver. But if they understand why they are doing it, that they will actually do it and be fine with it. But if they had to make the decision themselves, they would probably have decided something different. But if you can bring all the stakeholders to the table or in the virtual room workspace and get this clarity around all the consequences and ramifications of a decision and why we're doing it, I think that's the way to do it.
I love that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I can see we've got the last question. So I'm just going to read it out loud. It's from Marcus. He asked, how do you bring the decision makers to discuss about a portfolio investment risks? So
I think it's pretty much what we have already said, at least in my mind, that you need to be, as the portfolio manager or project manager or whatever manager needing the decision, you have to identify the decision. And then you need to talk to the stakeholders. They will then realize, hopefully, that this is important. And then they will go into this and prepare themselves and contribute to this decision. And if it's a big portfolio or investment decision with a lot of risk, that will become quite evident, and you will talk about that in that process. So I think it's more about finding the understanding what decision is to be taken and when it's needed to be taken, and then reach out to the stakeholders.
Yeah, you kind of touched on that while you were talking about it, but any other thoughts, Mark?
I think Andreas is spot on. I think that's, if you're doing your natural kind of walkthrough, it kind of happens naturally over time. I have found also, in some cases, when I talk in terms of when I actually say the word risk, some executives kind of glaze over. They feel like it's an academic conversation. So I found, luckily, lately, the notion of scenario planning or scenario analysis has started to come more in vogue. So I kind of cheat a little bit and use that and say, so let's talk about the scenarios of where it could go wrong. What could possibly go wrong with this? And typically I get a bit more response. People are much more, people love to talk about what could go wrong. And so it kind of plays to them naturally and they start speaking up. But it's all the same. It's just semantics at that point.
Yeah, but I think here's also important because every time you go into discussions about risks, you will quickly know that each and every one have a little bit different views on what a risk is.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can be good to clarify that from the beginning, that you want to talk about the specific project risks, or if you wanted to talk about the strategic risks. I mean, that they are different, and you approach them and mitigate them in different ways. So that is, of course, important to have that clarified upfront.
Yeah, thank you kindly both. That was actually the last question, and we're running a little over an hour, so it's 6 minutes past 5. I'm not sure if any of you would like to share anything else. Feel free to do so. We still got participants in here, so feel free to add anything. If not, no pressure. And this was honestly, from my point of view, this was lovely and wonderful, and it's such a pleasure to listen to you both. You're experts on saying exactly what needs to be said, and I'm really honored that you've accepted the invite to open up our first online webinar of the conference. I'm not sure if you'd like to add anything. I'm going to give you a little bit of a space.
The only thing I would add, Katie, is first of all, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for coming. This is a bit of an experiment in terms of more quick hitting short topics and spread out over a month, as you said. So please don't hesitate to provide feedback back to Katie in terms of how we can make this better. If the discussion was too fast, too slow, if you think like an hour is still too long, if you'd like it to be a little bit more condensed, what about the format? If we try, Andreas and I kind of prepped for this, and we kind of try to get ready, try to tee it up as kind of more like a podcast type discussion where it's just back and forth one-on-one. If you think wider panels would be better, please help us. The topics, if you think that there's some specific topics you think we should get into.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're trying to make this useful for as many people as possible.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better, honestly. Thank you so much. Yeah, exactly as Mark said. If you've got any feedback, if you've got any ideas, questions, please let me know. Join our PPM workout platform. Invite your peers, colleagues, friends, and get the conversations going. The website and the platform is for you, and we really want to make it a place for you to get inspired, to share your knowledge, passion. So this is why we're here.
And thanks to Andreas. This has been a really engaging conversation. I wasn't kidding. I look forward to be able to sharing a beer and getting into more details.
I look forward to that too. No, I enjoyed this very much, and I think it's very useful to have these conversations, because they always spark some new ideas or thoughts or reflections that I will be helped by as well. I will bring this into my work when I get back from vacation. And I really hope that the audience also get some new ideas or thoughts that will help them in their work. And if only one of you have got that, I'm happy, because then I think we have made a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again so much. I can see someone connecting. I'm not sure if they would like to ask a question. Not sure. We can wait a little bit. If not, I'm going to give it a little bit of a time. But yeah, this was amazing. I'm hoping I'm invited to the beer as well from bringing this conference together. Please invite me to Sweden or the US.
Absolutely.
And feel free to ask questions. As I mentioned, at the PPM platform, write posts. It's all for you. And if I can do anything else on part of Y Summits, or as we can do anything for you as a company, please don't hesitate to ask away. And we are having another talk, a keynote actually tomorrow with Mary Spark at the same time, so 4 p.m. Grab a cup of tea or coffee, and we will continue tomorrow if that's all from my side. There are no more questions, so I'm really grateful for everyone joining in, and thank you again, Andreas and Mark, for opening up the entire conference. And I felt a great vibe. So thank you again so much for all your input and energy. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you again so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.